All right, I want to start off by saying that I'm neither a capitalist nor am I not a capitalist, okay? Any label you could ascribe to me would be misleading, and that's how it should be, because otherwise, what are you doing? You're giving up your agency. If you actually fully adhere to some sort of ideology, all you're doing is just being an avatar for some other guy's ideas, and that's just not how you should be living life. But today, with that in mind, I do want to make a capitalist argument for why landlords are a net negative for the economy, because I think there's a compelling case to be made here. To kick things off, I want to start by establishing the fact that housing is a non-productive asset. What does that mean? Well, it's just like gold. Take gold. Gold just sits there. It's a rock. It does nothing. You buy gold, it just sits on your desk, collecting dust. If its value changes, that's just purely a number on a piece of paper changing. Nothing about it actually changed, and that's the issue with housing. You build it, that's productive, but once it's built, it doesn't do anything. It just depreciates. It's a depreciating asset. It loses value over time, because at least gold doesn't degrade. I really want to touch on the three types of housing there are. There's three types of housing for sale out there. There's pre-construction, where you're actually investing to make it be built, which is the most productive way to do it. Then you got newly built housing, which even though you didn't make it be built, implicitly you were incentivizing them to be built, and so therefore you still basically grew the economy by buying a newly built house. But then the third kind, the most popular kind, 3 out of every 4 houses are this kind. It's a resale home for sale. It's a house that already existed, the building was already there, and then someone else came along and bought it from some other guy. That is the issue. Because most of the housing out there that people buy are the resale types, which means that when you buy them and do anything with them, nothing changed, nothing of value was created in the economy. But that's the issue. Most rental units out there are bought as resale units. Landlords who charge rent for them are not contributing to the economy. The only productive part of investing in housing is the construction of it. If you buy an existing house or building and rent it out, that did nothing productive for the economy in any meaningful way. And in fact, if you decide to buy an existing building and then raise the rent as part of your strategy to make money, you've in fact harmed the economy. And that moves me on to my second point here. Over 3/4 of landlords are net positive on rental unit income and rising. That's after your property tax, your mortgage, your interest, all of your maintenance, upkeep, all of that shit. There's still over 75% are profiting beyond all of those expenses. Every dollar of profit is an economic inefficiency. Think about it, right? It's a wealth transfer from the renters, who are poorer, to the landlords, who are objectively richer. And I mean, look, okay? This isn't some fucking meet the rich type shit, okay? I literally ran a private equity firm. I am definitely furthest thing from economy as one could get. That being said, though, it's simple economics, right? The richer you are, the less you spend, and the more you save per marginal dollar earned. Meanwhile, the poorer you are, the more you spend per additional dollar earned. It's just how she goes. The net effect is you're going to have a massive decrease in business activity and a contraction of the economy if you accumulate wealth amongst a select few. That's just what happens. It's not good for the economy, and that's not naturally what should take place. And yet, the more you spend on rent, the less you're going to be able to spend on anything else. Rent is a giant haircut, a foundational thing that sets a person's budget and ability to spend and circulate money throughout the economy. And even worse, the less you have to spend, the more you'll choose to spend what few dollars you do got on cheap shit that's probably made abroad, lower quality, and in the long run, it's going to cost you more. That's the most insidious part about all this. You're not only getting worse quality shit, and you're going to be buying it from outside the country, therefore exporting dollars from your community and making everyone poorer, further causing this whole doom loop. But on top of that, in the long run, it's more money, because the more shit sucks, the more often you have to keep buying things. You know, it's like a nice pair of boots versus a cheap pair from Walmart. It could last you a season, could last you a decade. Get a good welt one, redo the sole whenever it needs. Way cheaper in the long run, and it's gonna be way better for your posture, your back, your health, and all those things have accumulating effects too. Like, just everything about it is just more expensive and less ideal. There's nothing good about buying cheap shit, and yet that's what we're forcing people to do, because when you got no money, because you're spending all your money on rent, it's the only option you got. The end effect is that this just hollows out the domestic economy. Everyone's worse off. We're all getting broke. And it's just more expensive in the long run, and it reduces class mobility, which is the death knell of any economy, because when you don't have class mobility, there's no hope. And when there's no hope, what's the point? And if there's no point, why try? Even worse, even if landlords are net negative on rental income for the year, are they? Think about it. They're still building equity in this thing the whole time. Instead of just getting it all for free, though, and a profit, instead, oh, they might have to contribute a few dollars to it. Oh, no. If you presented someone with an investment opportunity where they had to pay $1,000 a month and got $2,000 in instant equity returns per month, they'd call it a scam, and rightfully so, because it is, unless it's fucking real estate now, isn't it? That's basically what being net negative on rental income is, okay? It sounds still like a scam. And now look, okay, I get the percentage of principal payments versus interest payments on a mortgage varies throughout the life of a loan, sure, yes. But again, under the premise that you have a mortgage on a rental property, that means a bank gave it to you, and banks are known for being stingy, conservative motherfuckers, unless you're CIBC. But that being said, unless they're CIBC, that means that you had such a margin of safety in their eyes for their very conservative assumptions in their model that you, at least in the short to medium term, are definitely not at risk of having issues with being able to pay off your loan. Which means that in the one point in the loan's life where you could be at risk of building negative equity, so to speak, you're just not going to be, because the bank would not give you the loan for the mortgage in the first place. That's just how banks work. If it's a rental property, it's an investment, and they're going to treat it as such. Look, the only time you could actually have this blow up in your face is if you buy at the top of the market, or if you buy with a variable loan at the exact point prior to a quantitative tightening cycle, or maybe you bought some of the worst housing stock on the market, or you were with CIBC and they had no controls to save your sorry ass. Either way, it just sounds like you suck at investing. Because at the end of the day, if you're investing in a rental property and you're not building a new one to do this, you're just fucking doing investing, and there's risk, and if it blows up in your face, tough shit. You didn't do anything of value anyway. Why would anyone bail out your sorry ass? And I do think we should have bailouts to incentivize people to build new rental housing stock. Yes, because that's a service of value to the economy. You just buying some fucking building to continue renting it out, or even converting it into a rental unit, if it wasn't built by you, you did nothing of value, and you deserve to take a haircut. It's called risk. And if you want to throw all that into consideration anyway, yeah, sure, we still can, but just remember, we also have to consider things like land and property appreciation, the chronic housing shortfall that you're taking advantage of through all this. What about the benefits of leverage in general that you're taking advantage of? Immigration-driven demand, tax advantages, the list goes on. There's so many other things working against you in this argument. It's not even funny. And all of this negative rental income shit's only an issue if the implicit return you're getting in the end is below what you're targeting, or if you just don't have the cash to fund all this, which again, remember, this is an investment. If you can't come up with the cash, that's a skill issue, because you just didn't predict what could happen when you're making an investment like this. Sometimes investments require cash inputs. If you don't got the cash, you shouldn't invest. Look at the stats on historical net rental incomes here too. Many places went from a very marginal profit to 5 to 10 times that in the span of less than 20 years. And that's after controlling for inflation. BC went from $500 to $5,000 in the course of a decade. How does that make any sense? It's not justifiable. Nothing of value is actually changed here. It's purely just numbers on pieces of paper. And as equity builds up, you can then turn around and leverage that into buying up even more property. And then you can use the cash flows from that and the equity building up to buy even more property, and then more property. And this giant house of cards keeps being built, and CIBC keeps funding it. Which brings me to my next point. You want to know what the worst of it all is? A third of landlords do not work. It's the same as Canada as a whole, sure. But think of it this way, okay? A third of Canadians do not work, but that third, let's be real here, most of them are probably not going to be productive anyway. A lot of them cannot work, regardless of their circumstances or desire, and a lot of them you don't want to work with. They just would suck to work with, okay? Even if you could force all of the third of Canadians who don't work to work, they're probably not going to produce much value. Meanwhile, look at the landlords. A third of landlords don't work. Did you know that landlords earn over 50% more than the average non-landlord Canadian in employment income? Where are the implications of that? That means they're some of the most productive members of our society, and if we allow them not to work just because they have some rent-seeking fucking asset that they can just charge a toll for, that is a huge loss to our economy. And as a society, this is one of the biggest issues. We just have all of these different fucking things where people get to rent seek, or they just get to do nothing. Everyone's just out for themselves. And the more and more we allow people to do this, the more our social contract breaks down. And before you know it, there's no one left to fucking produce anything of value. Wow, Matt, can you believe this? Fuck! Did you know that real estate and rentals is the largest part of the Canadian economy? 1 in every $7 of GDP. And remember, it's a non-productive asset. If we invested in productive assets instead, we'd be able to get continuous value from them and be able to fund our future financial obligations. You know, it would free us up to do things like paying down our debts, reinvesting into further societal benefits and future endeavors, or we could actually just lower taxes. There's so many options we could do if only we invested in things that gave us value in return. Unfortunately, we don't. We invest in housing, a non-productive asset. 1 in every $7 of our GDP is tied up in it. Housing is a black hole for our economy. Any growth from existing real estate is a mirage. Beyond the building of the building itself, there is nothing more to grow. It's just there. It doesn't do anything. And yet, housing sucks up all the investment in this country. Banks like it since they can just write loans all willy-nilly, and since they have assets backing them up, they at least have something to go after if they default, right? And, you know, this comes at the direct expense of business loans, most importantly of all. Look, I can tell you from personal experience here, getting business loans in Canada is a fucking bitch, and it's awful. Look, especially if the type of business you're trying to get a loan for does not have capital assets to collateralize the loan against, you are shit out of luck. And there's nothing you can do because housing's just right there. The banks are going to write loans for those any day of the week. What's the net effect of all this? Banks focus all their resources on writing mortgages for non-productive assets at the expense of providing capital for productive assets, like, for example, starting a business or financing an expansion of a business. And to make matters worse, the CMHC securitizes all mortgages, further incentivizing banks to go on lending for non-productive assets at the expense of productive ones. And they issue mortgage loan insurance too, which you must take if your house has less than 20% equity and you got a mortgage. Now look, this means two things, okay? One, this encourages banks to lend more than what is affordable to the people getting loans. This is bad since it dramatically increases housing prices as banks offload all of the risk onto the government, which is us, remember? And there is zero incentive for encouraging supply to catch up with demand. It's all about demand side generation, which is fine and all except for the fact that we're in a supply shortage. We are having an issue with supply, not demand, and yet we just keep propping up demand. Since lending for housing is now a risk-free, long-duration return for banks, they're obviously going to prioritize writing more and more mortgages at the expense of any productive asset. And two, the upwards price spiral on housing from these policies makes housing one of the safest and highest returning assets in the country. This is what makes housing a black hole. It's one of the safest returns. It's one of the highest returning assets. Why invest in anything else if you got housing to invest in, right? And so housing eats the economy, and housing is a non-productive asset, which means that we stagnate, or more accurately, we backslide. That's why we got no money. That's why life is progressively sucking more and more every day, and it's why our economy isn't growing. Our addiction to housing and rentals has set us back decades, and it's going to continue to do that for the foreseeable future. And to make matters worse, if it ever does crash, remember, the government took all the risk on this shit. They privatized the returns, but socialized all of the risk. We're approaching $1 trillion in liabilities, and yet still incentivizing banks to pile on more? None of this makes any sense. And we almost can't deflate this too, is the worst part. And yet economically, we cannot let this continue. Do you know the median home in Canada used to be about 1,200 square feet 50 years ago? Now it's about double and growing, except for condos, which thanks to the investor units are shrinking. But, you know, the issue is we haven't been building any starter homes for the last 50 years or so. Why is this in a video about landlords, though? Raising the bar on the bottom rung of the housing ladder means that more people are going to be renting for much longer. This means there's even more demand for rental units, and we haven't been building anywhere near enough as is since about the 70s. All this combines to give landlords immense pricing power, and then combine that with all the mechanisms they got to increase rent beyond the legal limit per year, like rent evictions, for example, allows for a rent to spiral upwards as a result. You might think this is just a functioning free market, but it's not, okay? If it was, we'd never have a housing shortage to begin with. Thanks to NIMBYs, government policy, red tape, municipal councils, corruption and collusion with developers, and a number of other factors, we aren't allowed to build enough housing. We just aren't allowed. And remember, as the median rent takes up over 50% of the median income, any hope of saving up enough to escape this trap becomes impossible. And every dollar spent on rent is a dollar robbed from the economy. It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know, housing's a checkbox at the end of the day. You got it or you don't, okay? You could be underhoused, sure. I'm like many stuck in investor units, sure. But after a certain point, you don't gain anything from more of it. Look, okay, we aren't the UK out here, thank God. We don't get any meaningful benefit from increasing increased investment in existing housing stock. All we get from our rent-seeking economy is an accelerating backslide in the quality of life. Every day that goes on, things will continue to get worse. So what do we do about this? Oh, you're serious. Look, I know this video kind of morphed from talking about landlords to talking about the housing market in general, but it's hard to talk about one without the other, right? The issue with the housing market is the source of all the rental market woes, right? Lack of new housing and chronic rental unit shortfalls are going to force up rent while giving landlords more power and growing the ranks of renters. This is reinforced by all the red tape and municipal shenanigans, and landlords are going to extract increasing profit levels from the market as a result. Government policies and the risk-free nature of investing in housing perpetuates all this. All these factors lead to a never-ending spiral where renters aren't able to spend, which strangles the local economy. Lack of investing in non-housing assets just accelerates this cycle. And our economy would crash if the housing market did, so the government can't even let any of this be fixed. And so we're all fucked, but we're gonna be even more fucked if we let this continue. So we have to do something, right? Well, if you want to fix this, we're gonna have to get a bit draconian about it. To start, we're gonna have to federalize zoning laws and then upzone everything. We have to override voices decrying housing development in general. We need to amend our policies and incentives so that they reward only new construction and not resale units. We need to open back up the floodgates of immigration, but specifically for construction companies worth of people and not white-collar workers that we already got an oversupply of domestically and do not need any more of as is. We need to build out infrastructure to catch up with the decades of underinvestment and accommodate the further pressure from people living in the new units. We need to legislate a minimum ratio of business loans to overall loans that banks can write each year that they must hit, or else. The government needs to step in and start offering 0% interest rate loans for new construction of housing, and also start guaranteeing new construction up to the number of units we've been in shortfall for. Only then will rent return to a competitive market and our economy to growth. Without increasing disposable income, we can never sustain a healthy domestic economy, and rent by far is the #1 drag on disposable income. By far. Without expanding growth capital availability to business, we will never get out of our stagnant business environment we're stuck in. I mean, fuck, I don't know, man. I'm just spitballing here. There's so many different avenues to go to the situation we're stuck in here, but unfortunately, over 40% of our MPs are currently landlords, so good luck, Canada.